President Joe Biden will be arriving here in July. He's very proud of his Irish roots, which he traces to Mayo and to the Cooley Peninsula in Louth. He's also very supportive and very proud of the role Irish America has played in the ongoing peace process. I think it's also very fitting that you attended a 1916 event in the USA. The founding of the Irish Republican Brotherhood there, its fundraising efforts for rebellion in Ireland, the death and funeral of O'Donovan Ross all made significant contributions to the 1916 Rising, and Tom Clark, James Connolly and other signatories of the proclamation also spent time in the USA. And as we know famously, the proclamation notes the support of our exiled children in America, which is evidence of the important role of Irish America at that time and in our own time. There would indeed have been no rising in 1916 but for the contribution of Irish America, and arguably there would have been no peace process at the time there was a peace process if it wasn't for the efforts of the people there. So I do think it's important that the government recognises the contribution and pays tribute to Irish America. You'll know yourselves that one of the most important issues for many Irish Americans is the plight of the undocumented. You've met many of them on your travels, and I know you're in good contact with Kieran Staunton out of your own county. It's estimated that 500,000 people left this state in the last 8 years. I mean, that's a mind-boggling number of people from a population of less than 5 million. They didn't just go to the USA, but they went also to Australia, Canada, Britain, Europe and Asia. But there are tens of thousands of people in the USA due to austerity policies, and that's not new. That goes back. Successive governments here have embraced immigration as a policy option, and it's believed that there are 50,000 illegal or undocumented Irish in the USA. So, contrary to government protestations, they didn't go for the crack. They didn't go as a lifestyle choice. They didn't go for the experience. They went, the majority of them, because they had no other option, no long-term employment prospects or meaningful work with proper terms and conditions. And many of them have families in the USA. They pay taxes. They contribute positively to society there. But when it comes to a bereavement or a family event like a christening or a wedding, they cannot return home. And while they contribute significantly to the US economy and are generally recognised as model citizens, they are indeed the Skype generation. And I've met them there in the USA, and I've met their families here, not least in your own county of Mayo. And I know it was hoped that President Obama's executive order would provide an opportunity for some of them to come out of the shadows and regularise and legalise their presence. But they still continue to live iter between two worlds. So can the Taoiseach update us on any discussions here the government has had with the US government on this issue? And President Obama's term concludes, Cian Cordia, later this term. How hopeful is the Taoiseach that a satisfactory conclusion can be achieved before then? And finally, the programme for government talks about the historical opportunity to radically reform the political landscape and states that the government is, and I quote, proposing substantive political and constitutional reform in order to create a strong, responsive political system. And you'll know that the fifth report of the Convention on the Constitution, which reported in November 2013, dealt with the issue of amending the Constitution to give citizens outside of the state the right to vote in presidential elections. And I was at that session. It was very, very informative. They actually used video conferencing to bring in representatives of the diaspora in Australia, the USA, France, Canada, Germany and England. And they also heard directly from people in the north. And the result was the Convention voted in favour of changing the Constitution to give citizens residents outside the state the right to vote in presidential elections. So can you tell us, Taoiseach, are you committed, and I know this is a big issue for people in the USA, to implementing this now almost 3-year-old recommendation of the Constitutional Convention?
Thanks very much, Deputy Adams. Yes, Deputy Vice President Biden is to come to Ireland. All the details haven't been worked out yet, but he wants to do a number of formal engagements, and at the same time, I think trace his family roots on both sides. I have to say that the opportunity to be present at the Kennedy Centre with 2,500 people watching some of the outstanding performing artists of Ireland was an occasion to remember, and was very greatly received by both the audience and the wider American public. I also think it important that in the Library of Congress and the other locations I visited, they had gone out of their way to present many of the newspaper reports, in particular of the Rising of 1916, which featured on the front page of the New York Times for almost 14 consecutive days. Obviously, the newspapers were very different then. They were all news and very few pictures. So much more reading on the front page than you'd find in modern day newspapers. When I met with the President and the Vice President, Deputy Adams, and Speaker Ryan, and by the 20 congressmen who turned up to the Friends of Ireland, Richie Neal and Congressman Peter King and so on, I mentioned the question of the undocumented. And clearly the United States government has been strangled here in terms of Capitol Hill, as they call it, because of the polarity between the two parties. And for my part, I urge them to get together where that's possible in the interests of a common objective and a common problem. I raised the issue again at the Speaker's lunch on Capitol Hill that day. Now, there is a bill tabled by Congressman Sensenbrenner in the US House of Representatives, and that was aimed at providing access to several thousand E3 visas for Irish citizens. It's a welcome and a positive step forward, but there's a great deal of work to be done in both houses of Congress before this bill might become law. So while the measure would advance our objective of, if you like, securing improved legal migration channels, it would not address the concerns of undocumented citizens currently in the US, to which Deputy Adams rightly refers. These remain a key priority and will continue to be a key priority in the time ahead with our contacts with the US authorities in Concordia. As you know, President Obama took executive action within certain limited constraints of the presidency, and that's appealed. There's a judicial case on immigration reform has now been referred to the US Supreme Court. There's a decision expected by early summer. Obviously, we don't know the outcome of that yet. If the appeal succeeds and the measure is implemented, President Obama's executive action could benefit a significant number of our citizens by lifting the threat of deportation on them and allowing work and travel more freely within the United States to those undocumented immigrants who would meet its conditions. So we'll wait and see what the outcome of that particular case might be. The government as a whole and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Dublin and our embassy in Washington will obviously continue to actively pursue all of these leads and so on. In respect of the question of the diaspora generally and their opportunity or the right to vote in presidential elections, I actually met with a number of people at one of the functions in Washington who have quite a deal of expertise available to us in this matter. It is a matter of particular interest to the Irish community abroad. Now, I've appointed Minister McHugh to deal with the question of the diaspora, and I've asked him specifically in respect of the diaspora issue, to pursue the question of making that become a reality. That with whatever conditions are appropriate, that we allow for people living abroad, Irish citizens, in whatever categories, to be able to vote in presidential elections. And that would be a specific priority of his as Minister for the Diaspora. It's my intention to see that commitment is carried through, Deputy Adams. I believe in it strongly, and I hope that we can bring it to a reality. Obviously, given the scale of the spread of Irish emigrants all over the world, how you do this will be a central part of the discussions. For instance, a miner or a welder in Alaska might not be inclined to travel to Washington, where he or she to have to go to vote to one central location. So we have to look at other means that can be validated and authenticated for people to be able to give their support. And then the question of how far back you go in the context of 35 million people in America claiming their Irish ancestry and their Irish heritage. These are all subjects for discussion. But let me assure you, government are committed to this, and it will be a specific priority of the Minister for the Diaspora to see that it's followed through.
Harris.